Our minds and our hearts all the time are with what is happening in Ukraine. We've been discussing it, but today we have the honor to have actually who is in Ukraine, a freedom fighter from Ukraine. So with us today is Nataliya Melnyk, and Nataliya is someone who's been fighting for freedom even before this war. She's been the director at the Bendukidze Free Market Center, which is an independent Ukrainian think tank. She is a political science, has studied politics and international and European studies. So she is in a position not only to give us some updates on what is happening on the ground from Ukraine, but also to give us a more kind of zoom out view of what's been the case in Ukraine since 2014. We've been hearing so much about the Maidan revolt and whether it's pushed Ukraine towards fascism, as Putin claims, or whether it was a major step towards more freedom in Ukraine. And also with us today, we've got my co-host, Mark. Thank you very much, Mark, for being with us. So, but the protagonist today, it's not us today. The protagonist is Nataliya. So, Nataliya, first question is, how are things there? How is the daily life in Kiev in terms of are the shops open? Is electricity and internet okay? Are there money on the ATMs? And how does your everyday life now, when we're in the day 11 or 12 of the war, how does life look like?
Yeah, so hello, everyone. Good to be here. I wish it were for a better reason, but so this is day 12 of the full-scale Russian invasion, because technically the war with Russia started back in 2014. So we are 8 years in. I will still tell you what's going on in Kiev, but I left Kiev yesterday. And after 13 hours of getting back to my hometown, I am in my childhood home right now. It's in the Western Ukraine. That's as far as I'm willing to go. Right now, it's not advised for women to stay in Kiev if they can get out, and well, for civilians in general. But you have to understand that a lot of people still staying in Kiev, they have already been internally displaced in 2014. So a lot of them already lost their homes once. So they're saying we're not going through that the second time. We are staying.
So you mean they were on the east, on the provinces that de facto have been that Russia have recognized them as now quote independent territories. Is that right? The Donbas areas.
Yes. So these are Russian proxies that were created by Russia with Russian support. Even though Russia never admitted. That's one of the things that Russia never admitted on the long list of things. So yeah, we are talking about Donbas region. It's Donetsk and Luhansk. And so these are the people who had to run away, Russian-speaking people running away from, other Russian-speaking people. So they're staying in Kiev. My plan was to stay in Kiev as well. And I'm already planning when I will be able to go back again, because that's where home is. But for all of us, Ukraine is home, right? So we are trying to do all we can to make sure that that stays like that. But as for life in Kiev, yes to electricity, hot water, heating, cell service, internet. Our banking system is working wonderfully, but there are certain logistical difficulties. So they're common for the banking system, for grocery stores. So because so many men signed up for the army or for the territorial defense units, that they are struggling from the shortage of drivers and warehouse operators. So that's why we have issues with ATMs, because there's no possibility to put more cash in, or very limited possibility to put more cash in. There's shortage of armored vehicles for that. So our national bank is trying to come up with creative solutions for that problem. So now if people want to withdraw some cash, they can do it actually at grocery stores, at checkout counters, while buying stuff. So they can also ask the cashier to withdraw money on top of it. And it also helps the cash issue, because if there are no armored vehicles to drive cash around and put it into ATMs, it's difficult to collect it from grocery stores. So
and you mentioned that many men are in the army. How ironic that Putin expected that Ukraine would open its arms to the Russian army, saying thank you for liberating us from this fascist regime. And actually, I'm reading in the news that there have been tens of thousands of men who were living in the West and returned to Ukraine to fight because they felt so that this was such an important thing. I have way more questions, but Mark, any questions from you?
No, I'm just following this argument. How do you follow the progress of the war right now? How do you think your fellow countrymen are doing against the Russians?
Well, me, and I'm free to use the word we, referring to Ukrainians in general, are extremely proud of what our army is doing, what our diplomats are doing, what our volunteers are doing, because they are making all of this possible. No one gave us this much time, day 12. This sounds like something incredible against allegedly the biggest army in the world. But I think a lot of this disbelief was grounded in what happened in Afghanistan, because the Afghan army fell apart so fast and so easily for their own reasons. I think even a lot of our partners in the West kind of expected the same thing to happen in Ukraine. But our army is new. Our army started being built, put together in 2013, 2014. So first it was powered by volunteers, and then it was being, improved all the time. But we have never been this well armed when we're talking about modern weaponry. So because of our partners' help, we were able to get our hands on Stingers, Javelins, Bayraktars, which are being, utilized very well. So I think what these people are doing, how they are protecting the country, is something unbelievable. They are heroes, and we have complete faith in them. And that's why, they're in the front lines, we're at the back, and we are trying to do whatever we can to help them out.
So let me ask a follow-up on this. So many people think that the attitude in Ukraine is a bit like Leonidas and the 300, we will die heroically. But it seems to me that, no, this is not the attitude. The attitude is we're actually going to win and militarily win. Am I right in that?
Well, yeah, one of the, I've been writing a post every day, trying to explain what's going on my social media. And one of commenters wrote something yesterday, like, you have to do everything you can to stop the war. And I responded to this saying, we're doing everything we can to win the war. Because this is exactly what we're trying to do. We can't lose this war because we will lose our home. We will lose Ukraine. Being under, Russian rule, having puppet government and things like that, this is not our way. This is not what we want. And you probably saw, pictures from a train station in Kharkiv. a city that has been heavily shelled for very many days, residential areas, schools, hospitals. So you will see tens of thousands of people gathering there for evacuation trains. And the Kharkiv is the biggest Russian-speaking people in the country, Russian-speaking, inhabitants city in the country. So all of these Russian-speaking people who the Russian army is attempting to save, they are all fleeing their saviors. They're all trying to get out of there because they want to have nothing to do with these people. And today, Russia suggested that the so-called green corridors will be possible. We've been struggling with those because they kept shooting at civilians who were, trying to get out. That they are possible, but they have to lead to Russia.
To Russia, yeah.
Which is ridiculous because obviously they do not understand that no one is going in that direction. No one wants to go to Russia. It doesn't matter which language they're speaking, which church they're going to. This is not an option. So they're trying to get either to the Western Ukraine or further on across the border to Europe. And a lot of the people who already left the country, most of them are women with children. Having children, they felt that they have no other option but to leave. So actually, the rhetoric they've been using is that they're saying, we are not refugees because we are coming back. So
right.
This is temporary. This is our home. We're going to go back as soon as we can, and we're going to start rebuilding. So this is the level of commitment. And it doesn't matter where our Ukrainians are, in Kiev, in the east, in the west, in the south, or they already temporarily left the country. All of us want to go back home.
And Mark and Natalia, so what I got from this conflict is in the first days, most of the people in the West thought, okay, we know Putin is a bad guy, but we don't want much to do with this. We don't have a horse in this race. But it was the heroism of the resistance that within 48 hours, we thought, oh, no, we have someone to cheer up here because this is so heroic that we can't stay out of it. And a big part of this heroism is being personified by the president himself, President Zelensky. So Natalia, do you want to tell us a bit about the president and how do you view him not only as now who is let's say a commander in arms, but also how would you view him as a politician who might understand issues around individual rights and freedom? So tell us a bit about him before the war and also how you would view him in the last 12 days, where he's this personification, let's say, of this spirit of resistance.
So when President Zelensky won the election, he did it by a landslide. So he had the support. He and his party had a huge support in Ukraine. But those people who did not vote for him kept saying, like, this is not our president, right? Like, we didn't vote for him. So we do not like him. He's a clown because he used to be a very successful comedian. So no one, like, there were a lot of issues that we could talk about, concerning Zelensky before, the new life in Ukraine started. And he was losing the support. The support was going down. The ratings were going down. And he was heavily criticized by a lot of people in the country. But then at probably the best moment in Ukrainian history for that to happen, he stepped up to the plate. So he, turned from a clown into the president that is widely respected and widely supported. Right now, the latest surveys are saying that more than 93% of Ukrainians support him, which is huge for a democratic country with free elections and opposition that is present in the country. So this could be a usual thing for Russia or Belarus, but not for us. So this, you see that this reflects a lot of, let's say, gratitude for how he is showing himself, for his commitment to, for him, refusing to be evacuated by Americans from Ukraine as soon as they started getting reports about, assassin teams being sent to Ukraine. That already, I think, 3 groups had their plans, somehow disrupted to kill him and the leadership. So he became target number 1 for Putin and his cronies, but he stayed, and he's saying all the right things. He's delivering all the right messages, and his team is doing great, especially when we're talking about the Minister of Defense, the leadership of the army. A lot of time was lost before the war started, but once the war started, it was the moment of unity. So right now, it doesn't matter, your political affiliation, whether you voted for him or not. People are supporting him. There are no arguments within, on certain issues. We will go back to arguing as soon as we win this war.
That's a good way to view it. Yeah, that's the big difference between a country which has some freedom to a country that is unfree. That you can argue even with your leadership, although, as you said, now it is clear that he's doing a good work and he's this personification of resistance. I'll go to Super Chats. We have more questions for Nataliya. Before I go to Super Chats, so people today, particularly today, your help and support doesn't have to come through a Super Chat. We have something which is more virtuous in this context, which is there is a Help Ukraine fundraiser where you can help with humanitarian and medical aid to Ukraine. And our friends in Ukraine have told us that it's a legit way to help, and it's a way that it's for a good cause, and also the help is probably gonna get there in the right hand. So our producer will also put it on the chat, and I would say also in the description. It is helpukraine.center, center with ER/EN, helpukraine.center/EN, and I'm sure it's also going to be in the chat. So let's see what our audience has to say. So thank you for your super chat, Sami. Thank you, Jonathan, very generous. Thank you, Bonnie. What is the main reason Russia is taking so long, asks Bonnie. So let's hear it from Nataliya. So why isn't this a quick and easy victory for Russia?
Well, because he completely misread the situation in the country. So originally his plan was for a blitzkrieg, which was supposed to last up to 3 days, during which, he would be welcomed. Well, his people would be welcomed in the country while he's miles away, and they would be able to overthrow our government and, install the puppet government. What a lot of people don't get about Ukraine, like overthrowing the government does not mean anything. If we are unhappy with our government, we take it to the streets. We are very vocal about it. And that's how the revolution happened in 2013. That's why it's so outrageous to me as a participant of that revolution. It's so outrageous to me to hear that there was some kind of Western-inspired violent military coup in 2013 that overthrew, a legitimate government. No,
can you tell us what's the quick version for the Maidan Revolution? So we hear a lot about it, and you said that in a way this conflict didn't start 12 days ago; it started in 2014, and you put the beginning of the revolt in 2013. Can you give us the 1-2 minutes version of what happened then? So Yanukovichs was in power. Yanukovichs was this Ukrainian politician who was pro-Russian, and he's been around for decades, as far as I can remember, Ukrainian politics. So he's the prime minister in 2013, and then what happens?
He was the president.
The president,
he won the elections. Yeah, he was the president. He was pro-Russians. And then at one point, he decided that he wanted to announce that we are not going to go through with association agreement with the European Union, that, pro-European choice is no longer to be. And he decided to imagine himself a local little dictator, and started basically introducing laws that would completely kill the freedom of speech, the right to protest, and turning the country into a police state of sorts. So first of all, the first ones to protest, it was not a revolt. The first ones to protest were students. And it was not a massive protest, but our students are very active. They were protesting against the switch, the value change, right? Because they didn't want to, turn their backs on Europe, because we are a European country. So that's where we feel we belong. And then instead of waiting for the protests to die down, and like every day there were fewer and fewer people, on one night, he sent the police to beat up the students. And that's when the revolution started, because in Ukraine, you don't beat up kids without any consequences. So right after that, basically, like most of students, parents, and grandparents joined in, and it turned into something incredible. It was a very scary time in our history, but the thing was that you felt scared when you were away from Maidan, from the Independence Square, where everything was happening. Once you were in there, you were not afraid, because of camaraderie, because of the shared values, shared vision. And Yanukovichs left. Like, we didn't know for a long time. Like, obviously, there were a couple of extremely bloody days because the police started shooting, snipers were working, killing the protesters, and we didn't know what to expect. We thought that the army might be sent in, with the tanks and armored vehicles, but that did not happen. Yanukovichs packed his things and left the country. And probably thinking that it would turn into a mess, that there will be infighting, whatever. But we were able to use that as an opportunity to instill, our civilizational choice. Since then, we had elections twice. So,
before we go to the elections, it's during that time that in the East you have the uprising of those who want their independence from Ukraine, and it's the same time you have Russia taking Crimea. Am I right?
Yes. So Russia took Crimea mainly because the Russian army was already there. Because quite stupidly, we allowed them to, keep stationing their fleet in Crimea. So it was very easy for them to overtake it. That's where they started, when they started spreading, this propaganda about the military coup, the violent overthrowing of a legitimate government. And a lot of people in the East believed that for a very simple reason, is that they have very strong ties, or had very strong family ties with Russia. They identified themselves more with Russians, and they watched the Russian TV. And Russian TV is poisonous. So, this narrow focus and this narrow source of information was the main reason why they believed the lies that were spread by Russia and from Russia. So yeah, some of them really believed that. Russia sent their troops in without identifying them as troops. Russia was sending them money and weapons. So, and that's how these little enclaves were created. A lot of the locals fled. That's the first time they lost their homes. A lot of locals who were not supporting any of it. Some locals who were not supporting it, they stayed, and mostly staying quiet, you know, because no one knew, no one understood where it would, you know, take them. And
just a question on this. What about the propaganda that these areas are bombed constantly by Ukraine? We're told that from 2014, they've been, depending on who you listen to, 4,000 or 15,000 civilians that are bombed by Ukraine and have lost their life.
Yeah, that's a wonderful story. Basically, like the opposite to a fairy tale, I guess, because it's something, a tragic fairy tale, right? It's very interesting to imagine a situation in which, in a European country, you have civilians being bombed for 8 years and no one says anything about it, no one does anything about it, and even the savior Putin comes in 8 years later. So what, he was sitting and waiting for these 8 years while the bombing and the genocide against Russian-speaking people was happening. Yes, so that's a lie. Their proxies were using residential areas as cover, trying to draw fire from the Ukrainian army. Ukrainian army is basically the only participant of the Minsk Accords actually sticking to the, you know, the quiet period. So there was certain weapons that were not allowed. Our side was the only one sticking to it. We also were given the order not to attack, not to counterattack. So basically our army was stationed there for 8 years, slowly getting killed off because they kept shooting, they kept killing soldiers because of these orders. And yeah, so that's a very exciting story, and it's very easy to find pictures of Donetsk during these 8 years, or Luhansk during these 8 years, where it was allegedly getting shelled basically every day with everything intact. And cities like Kharkiv, Volnovakha, Mariupol, Akhtarka, which are or have been shelled for 12 days, and what they look like now. You know, after
you see the difference. Yeah, you see the difference. You mentioned the Minsk Accords. This was for our audience, this was the peace treaty, so to speak, between Russia and Ukraine in concluding the 2014 things. Mark, till I check more super chats, any comments or questions, the floor is yours.
In America, we're getting tons of misinformation, so I'm glad you cleared some of this stuff up. Because social media is certainly not the place to get your news about what's going on in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia. But I'm curious to know what kind of government did you guys install in 2014, and how is that progressing until Putin decided to come in and stick his nose into your business again?
Well, it's a very interesting word that you install. We elected. We elected our government. So there was a interim government before we were able to hold the elections. So the elections were held pretty fast, and President Petro Poroshenko won the elections on the platform of promising to finish the war very fast. And that's something like we all wanted. Like no one in their right mind wants to see their people killed, or wants to keep killing other people. And we wanted peace, and we wanted like the solution, a fast solution. That didn't happen. So it turned into, 8 years of an ongoing war. And so Petro Poroshenko was the first president, his government, and then when he was going for the second term, he lost the elections. So President Volodymyr Zelensky won. So we had two democratically elected governments. And I know that for a lot of Russians, they do not understand how free elections work because they never had a capable opposition going against President Putin. But yeah, in a democratic country, you vote for your government. It's interesting that a lot of pro-Russian or even pro-Putin politicians were actually members of the parliament, because once again, we're a democratic country, so they're allowed to have their own opinions. No one was doing anything to them. And another very popular misconception about, a Nazi government that was installed in...
Tell us a bit about this whole fascist thing. So you've been active in the freedom movement. So if fascism was so widespread in Ukraine, probably you would be at the target of it. So what's your experience with, quote, fascism in Ukraine? Where did all this... Of course, we know about the Azov battalion, but where does the truth begin and where does the urban myth end?
Well, that's where the myth begins and ends, with Azov, because it's actually honestly ridiculous to be hearing about Nazis running the country, because both the first president and the second president elected after the revolution, they're Jews. And so our current president is a Jew and our minister of defense is a Jew. So it raises a lot of questions. And then we have Russians coming in to save whoever from Nazis, and they bomb a memorial site, Baban Yar, in Kiev, killing 5 civilians. And the memorial site was actually for Jews who were killed, by Nazis. So there are very many holes in the stories they're spreading. The thing is just, hearing it and believing everything you hear. So it's very easy to research the information to see that that is not true. And of course, we have neo-Nazis in the country. It's a small marginal group, like they would be in any democratic country, because this is what democracy is about. So just saying that the whole country is a Nazi country is just something so ridiculous that I don't even understand how people would believe this. And we already have people, the prisoners of war, Russian soldiers. We record diligently every single interview with all of them, and you maybe saw a couple of them. So these soldiers are saying that they were lied to, and they actually thought that they were coming here because, Ukraine, to save the whole of Ukraine from Nazis. And when they see that they have to go against unarmed, in many cases unarmed, Russian-speaking people who are telling them to get the hell out of their country, and people who are starving in cities in like deep humanitarian crisis, but they are refusing to take food from occupants, they're starting to get the message that what they were told is far, far away from the truth.
And again, people just need to see election results. The far right in the last elections got something marginal, like 2%. And I'm in Greece, a country where the Golden Dawn, actual fascists, some years ago were reaching something like 8%. So what does this mean? That our neighbors would attack us because Golden Dawn thugs were getting 8%. So let me ask you, before we go to more super chats, let me ask you one last question, which you mentioned that you want, everyone wants peace, but the question now is this: what would be a victory for Ukraine? So today, Russia, so actually not only that, so the discussion goes this way, that for this to end, Ukraine needs to have something like a victory and Putin needs to go back home and sell something like a victory. So Russia wants 4 things. One is for Ukraine to hold its military activity. I assume if the war ends, that's self-evident. Both sides stop the activities. Second, though, change its constitution to include neutrality so it cannot join the EU or NATO. Third, recognize Crimea as a Russian territory. And fourth, recognize the independence of the separatist regions of Donetsk and Lugansk, the so-called People's Republics. By the way, people, when you hear the term People's Republics, you know that's not up to.
It has a bad ring to it, right?
Yeah, it's not gonna end well. So from this, okay, let's put aside the whole military activity. Change the constitution so that it guarantees neutrality. Recognize Crimea. Recognize the independence of the separatist regimes. Do you think this is a basis for peace, or do you think that so would the average Ukrainian consider this a good deal if it is to end the war?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I wouldn't also take out the first point, because it's actually worse than that. It's not ceasing military activity. It's demilitarization, meaning that we have to give up our army altogether.
All right.
So this meant disband the army, sent away the weapons we were given. So yes, which is like all four points are absolutely unrealistic and unreasonable. With, having Russia as a constant threat for our sovereignty, it's not possible to give up our army. The point about the changes to the constitution, promising that we will never ever join any kind of alliance or bloc or whatever. We are a sovereign country, so it's up to us to decide whether we're joining. We might not want to join NATO at all, right? The only reason why we want to join NATO because we feel under threat from Russia. So this is something that Russia is creating itself. So for us, it's the matter of our defense and independence. We announced our European choice very loudly in 2013. We are not giving it up because Russia is telling us to do it, once again, a sovereign independent country. Then giving up on Crimea and agreeing to the independence of these people's republics, it's not an option.
So you don't share the view that says that these are de facto lost, like these are lost, you cannot win them back?
No, we had too many lives lost because we were trying to not let that happen, not to allow their independence. But the problem is deeper now. So as you, I'm sure know, Putin recognized these people's republics, but he recognized them not within their current borders, so not within the actual Russian proxy territories, but within their administrative borders, meaning that two whole regions, most of them are controlled by Ukrainians, inhabited by Ukrainians, would have to be given away. Because of this point about the recognition, that's where we were following very closely, because they're small enclaves, and the whole oblast, the whole region where they're in, they're much bigger. So it's not possible.
So how does this end? And Mark, I also want your take on this. How does this end? So many in the West are very scared that if this starts escalating in terms of including NATO powers, either as NATO or member states of NATO assisting Ukraine, they're afraid that this could lead to an escalation that would look something like a world war. And of course, the elephant in the room is that Russia has nuclear weapons, and you could say it's suicidal to use them, but if they're used, then no one cares if it was suicidal or not. If you have the nuclear threat over your head. So, what's your estimates on how this can end? And Mark, I can start with you here because. So you give us like the most West. Are you afraid that that this could lead to a world war?
I'm afraid that everybody's back is going to be up against the wall because the negotiating terms that the Russians have put on the table are not viable for anybody, and the only alternative for people in Ukraine is to win the war, which at this point, I don't think a psychopath like Putin would allow to happen without taking a number of folks down with him. My hope is that the Ukrainian people march into Russia and liberate Moscow.
Well, right.
I mean, luckily, I think the Russians are totally incompetent, and they're facing something. They've imbibed their own publicity, and they didn't think they were going to meet the type of resistance that they did. And I don't know that they're competent to face it. So the Ukrainians have a great chance. To me, it's just, how is Putin going to get out of this fix?
Yes.
Go on, Natalia.
So I would agree to what you were saying earlier, that Putin needs to come back with some sort of a win, or something that he can sell as a win. But I would agree with the point that by attacking Ukraine, he basically signed his own death wish, and I don't mean it literally. Right, so like a death of his regime.
Political death, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Because obviously everything is going wrong for him. They were not able to reach or hit any of their targets that they, originally put up. Everyone sees that, Russian-speaking people are trying to get rid of the Russian army. They don't want them here, because this is home, and that's where we're staying. But the idea is that for us, basically, like this, the whole situation, the whole war can have two outcomes. That's what we're saying, that either Ukraine wins or Russia loses. There's no other way out of it. We have to win. That's why we are fighting so desperately. And we will not stop fighting. We don't want to see people die. We don't want to keep seeing our civilians being killed. More than 840 children have already been injured. We don't know how many people exactly have been killed, civilians, because a lot of them are missing. And there's no access to certain areas. Russians are not agreeing to green corridors so that we could, get out people who desperately need help, because they're freezing without any food in their basements, because they have no heating, water, electricity, or anything like that. So this is real genocide, again, for Ukrainians. And this is a real tragedy. And believe me, none of us are enjoying any second of this. We don't want to be light masking all the time, meaning that we have to sit in the dark. I'm actually doing something that I shouldn't be doing by talking to you with my lights on. We don't want to, like when I was in Kiev, we were getting airstrike alerts at least 10 times a day. So basically, more than 10 times a day, you would have to hide in a bomb shelter. So you have people sleeping in metro or subway stations, or living in basements the whole time. This is unbelievable that it's happening in the middle of Europe. But it also adds to this, desperation that we will keep fighting. And that's why you will see huge lines of people trying to sign up for the army, for the territorial defense. And that's where the joke comes from. Like before everything started, people would try to bribe their way out of the army because we have conscription. And now you have people trying to bribe their way into the army or the territorial defense. Yes, like the whole world has gone mad. And you're absolutely right. You have a lot of Ukrainians coming back to fight. But one of the reasons why they're doing it is that now they're finally allowed to shoot back. And this is the major dip. Like it's a game changer. So now they don't have to be just waiting to be slaughtered. They can defend themselves. They can defend their land. Sure, they sent away their families, their children, so that they don't have to worry about that, so that they don't have to be raped, like 11 people in Kherson. 6 female victims died after that. So the war crimes that Russia is committing every single day are just atrocious. And we not only want to win the war by finally dealing with this threat, we also want to make them pay. So we want to, we are taking them to court, it's a huge tragedy that these lives will not be, returned, right? These people will not suddenly be brought back to life, but we will make sure that their sacrifice, and it was a sacrifice, will not be for nothing, and we will remember every single one of them.
Can I just ask something? Russia has done horrible things throughout its history, but this seems to be the first time that the world is against Russia. And we know this may mean political suicide for Putin, but do you have any sense at all that Russian people within Russia, I know there's been some public protests, are actually moving against Putin, and that there could be a democratic movement in Russia, that this could end up reversing completely on him?
That would be basically the ideal case scenario, right? So this would be a big win, not only for Ukraine, but I think for the civilized world in general, right? Well, other than demilitarization of Russia, that will also be nice. But I am the believer of people choosing their own government. I believe that the Russians fostered this government, let it grow and, turn into this monster, and they're the ones who have to deal with it. So, it's not our fight. They need to decide it for themselves. So if they want to overthrow Putin, they have to do that. The thing is that they are too afraid to do it. A lot of people who tried opposing him or being vocal, they fled the country. They either did that some years ago, when they had a chance, or they're doing it now because they're trying to avoid these absolutely draconian laws, basically saying that if you talk about the war in Ukraine, using facts that contradict the main, let's say, party line, you can be sentenced to 15 years in prison. And
historically, this is unbelievable. Even in the Gulag, even in the Stalin years, you could take 5 years Gulag for nothing, and it was, of course, outrageous. But this is even more unbelievable. 15 years for spreading quote misinformation. So this is, I couldn't believe it. I thought this is probably propaganda. This can't be, but actually it's true. And we've seen images with the police stopping people, checking their phones, and this is unbelievable. And this is a message to the people with the low political IQ who say, well, Trudeau does some bad things, America does some bad things, and Putin does some bad things. Everyone does some bad things. No one throws you for 15 years in prison because you don't agree with the imperialistic war. So it's not the same people. Don't be that type of person. Okay, let me read some more super chat because we're running out of time. So Eric says, came late if this was already discussed. How well is the training of the Ukrainian army since its build-up recently since 2014? Natalia has touched on this. Natalia, very quickly, why would you put a difference in the army post-2014 and pre-2014?
Because it was non-existent before that.
Okay.
That's very easy. So a lot of what we had was very old school, especially when we're talking about weapons, ammunition, and the main point being what we had left, because a lot of it was sold illegally, because no one felt the need to pay close attention to it. And then, everything changed in 2014, and people were wondering, why are our soldiers not dressed, right? Why don't they have shoes, or why don't they have weapons and things like that? So like in Ukraine, we have a lot of issues. Ukraine, we're dealing with this point, doing our best. It was a very corrupt country, and a lot of people, especially people in power, they did everything they could and they wanted to make themselves rich, and especially if they had access to the military resources and military funds. So in 2014, volunteers stepped in. Ukrainians started sending a lot of money into it. So they were buying and importing things from Europe, from the US, like to make sure that, our army had the simplest drones, for example, or a night vision, things like that, something super, super basic. And then since 2014, we realized that we needed to work on this. So they introduced basically an army tax on top of the tax that we had. So there were more funds. Of course, a lot of it was still misappropriated. That's basically like part of our political culture. But like I said, we're dealing with it. We're working on it as soon as our anti-corruption agencies start working, hopefully soon. Well, after the war, right now, right? This is not a top priority, but after the war, we will get back to it. So like more funds were being put into it. There was a lot more attention. We have wonderful civil society organizations who work with the army, including training. We were having one of the things that pissed Putin off, all the NATO training our guys and girls were receiving. So we started actually paying attention to our army. And now we can see that it's a pretty capable army, and it does have reserves. And it does have, now a lot of people wanting to sign up. It's a lot more prestigious. And, when you have, when your army is basically responsible for, it might sound a bit weird, especially coming from a person that is in the freedom movement, but we are very patriotic. So, when the army is actually fighting for freedom and for the future of their country, they can do some pretty incredible things. And this is the level of the difference of motivation that we see, between the Ukrainian army and the Russian army. They are here because they were lied to and made come here. They are not greeted, they are not welcome, and they see it. They don't have the necessary supplies that they need. They run out of food, they run out of gas, and no one is coming to help them. And then you have a super highly motivated army that is being hailed heroic all over the world. And this makes like a huge difference.
And for people who have any question on how morality can play a role, go read the memoirs or books from Russians who were fighting in the Chechen war. And they were literally in hell. You're in a city where you are fired from everywhere and you are asking one basic question. Why am I here? And when you cannot answer the why am I here question, the war is anyway hell, but this makes the war double the hell. So totally agree with you. There is no contradiction between being pro-freedom, pro-individualism, and fighting for freedom. These things, I would even say, can go well together, and there's definitely no contradiction there.
Maybe need to clarify is that, so there's misconception that our army, our people are being made to fight for the government. This is not what they're fighting for. They're fighting for their country. So there's a big difference, when
definitely.
it comes.
So Michael, thank you for your contribution, asks the question which is on the mind of all of us. Will Putin, actually, we're going to answer the nuclear question last. So I give both of you a minute to think about it. Will Putin go nuclear? Duncan, thank you for your message. He says, give Putin hell. Thank you, Alison. Kmetya, one for Ukraine, one for ARC UK. Thank you for your contributions. Alison says, great episode today. Thank you very much. And thanks again, Jonathan. So I thank all our contributors. So let's go to the final question. Will Putin go nuclear if he thinks he will be overthrown? I'll start. My prediction is no, I don't buy that Putin is crazy. And also, I don't buy this thing that the nuclear bomb is a thing that you have on your desk. It involves many, many people. It involves people in the chain of command. And these people must know that it's going to be 5 minutes after that, it's going to be the end of them, their families, their country, their history. I mean, everything that stands for Russia will be lost. And I hope that these people know it. So I don't think that it's a crazy guy who can just press a button. But hey, I've been wrong in the past. I really hope I'm not wrong in this one. So Mark, do you think Putin will go nuclear? And then we'll finish with Nataliya.
I don't think so either, but he did muster 175,000 troops and all the logistical support that it takes to maintain those folks. And that's a lot of people involved in egregious, brutal violence against innocent human beings. And I also think we spend a lot of time trying to figure out what's in the mind of a malignant narcissist creep, psychopath like Putin, and we can't. There's a lot of people who didn't think that he would go through with the invasion in Ukraine, that it was sort of a dumb move. It turned out to be utterly political suicide, and now he's trapped. What will a trapped malignant narcissist do who's sort of psychopathic? I have no idea, but I'm going to weigh on the side of no, because that's utterly suicidal. But he's surprised us in the past. Maybe he'll surprise us now.
And also the tactics of a nuclear war, because it's so unthinkable. It's very difficult to predict. Like, even if you go in the theory of war, there are very few people who can actually say, I can predict what's going to happen if in a nuclear exchange. So we're definitely not the...
Well, also quickly, I mean, Rand was one of the first or only people during the Committee of Un-American Activities to testify that Russia was one of the most incompetent countries on the face of the earth, and to talk about Reagan in negative terms, in part for the fact that he tried to stir up fear and anxiety about the Russian bear. And we find out, of course, that the entire country has the GDP of Texas. They're incompetent. Maybe their missiles will leave the launch pads, but that's sort of improbable.
Nataliya, what's your take on the nuclear question?
So I would, I'm going to use the Hollywood cliche because, it's been in so many movies. So I do not think that he will press the button. I do hope that if it's not for his own sanity, that there might be people around him that will see, how crazy that is. But I also want to point out that that cannot be the way that the situation goes nuclear. He already seized Chernobyl. His people already seized Chernobyl. If something goes wrong there, we already know how the first time went and what the consequences were. So when you have heavily armed people with heavy machinery there, it's extremely dangerous. And his people already bombed heavily the biggest nuclear power plant in Europe, which is located in Ukraine. Someone thought that it was a good idea to bomb a nuclear power plant, while the employees of the plant were begging them through a loudspeaker not to do that, not for their lives, but because it was crazy. So there are other ways in which this situation can go nuclear. And that's why this is not a Ukraine problem. This is not even a Europe problem, right? This is a really big world issue. Because if we are talking about using nuclear weapons, we can follow the idea of a mutually guaranteed destruction, right? So when you reach the point, the two of you reach the point where the destruction is mutually guaranteed, you're supposed to turn away, and extract yourself out of the situation. But if something, happens either at the, in Chernobyl or in one of our nuclear power plants, this can also have immense negative consequences forever.
And just to clarify for the audience, we don't mean that the nuclear factor is going to become a nuclear bomb. That cannot happen. No. But you can have significant radiation, which is going to cause big problems to all the neighboring nations. By the way, for our audience who have read Atlas Shrugged, not wanting to have to make a spoiler, remember the scene towards the end where a thug goes to take control of Project X and starts playing with buttons. Anyway, so Nataliya, first of all, again, our solidarity and all that, it goes without saying. Before you tell people where they can find more about your work and where you post about the war, let me remind the appeal for Ukraine. So helpukraine.center, center with ER/EN, helpukraine.center/EN, where you can send humanitarian and medical aid to Ukraine. It's been vetted by people who trust that it's a good organization. So Nataliya, final words and where people can follow you.
Guys, thank you for your support. Thank you for your interest in what's going on in Ukraine. I would really appreciate if you spread the word, the true word. If you don't fall for the Russian propaganda, just stay away from it, And for more information, you can, actually follow me on Facebook. Just use my name that you can see on your screens. I will also provide you with links to the Ukrainian media that covers everything going on in the country in English. So this would be basically a more direct way for you to learn things, because what I write, it can be a bit more emotional because this is me living through this. And it's actually one of the ways to help me cope with what we're going through, because a year ago we all thought that the pandemic was something horrible, and now we are at war, and this experience certainly outshines the previous ones.
You said 10 times every day people have to rush in shelters. Imagine these people. We get pissed off if I told you in the next week your internet is going to go down 10 days. People are going to be, oh my God, that's horrible. Imagine having to stop what you're doing and run for your life and worry that those around you, your family, are safe. This is unimaginable. But also, who could believe that we would have such a brave resistance, so-called generation that are only about social media and stuff, are there in barricades, in the resistance. And again, this is so inspiring. So a big thank you from we don't represent anyone, but I sense it's from the whole world, that the whole world is actually watching and the whole world is actually admiring. And, I'm not religious to say to send prayers, but to send whatever is the secular equivalent. Mark, parting words.
Yes, you got the world behind you. We love that you guys are fighting so courageously, and we're going to do our best to back you up. You got the citizen support of the world.
The citizen support of the world. So, next things happening to today, 9 o'clock, we have HBTV with Harry Binswager and Adam Mosson. They're going to talk property rights. And check again the link when the episode is live streamed, but maybe we add to the content the link for the humanitarian aid, and also follow Nataliya, and hopefully soon we're going to be discussing not about the war, but how Ukraine is becoming a bastion of freedom, not compared to Russia, but compared to all other countries in Europe. Mark, Natalia, thanks so much. Thanks to our audience. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.